Hi, I'm Terry Cargus, the Executive Director here at the Petersen. This is a great opportunity to introduce a man that is a true visionary, somebody who took a small business in a little town in Michigan, had a vision and an idea, and worked very hard and built it into the premier collector car insurance company in the world. What he has done, when you consider how many cars, I think it's over 1 million, 1.2 million cars that they insure. They have a publication that right now reaches 600,000 people. They also happen to be the sponsor of the world famous vault here in the museum. But this is a fellow who will give you insights into what I think the future of the world, or the car world, the collector car world, the vintage car world is all about. He has as much information and knowledge, and what he's doing with data and data collecting is magnificent. They've started a program that I'll let him talk to you about, the Drive Source or Drive Share, which is something very special indeed. But without any further ado, McKeel Hagerty.
Thanks, Terry. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I have a very visual presentation, so if anybody is unable to see the screen, it's going to be better if you can see it. It's better to, I think, show pictures of cool stuff than for me to stand up here and talk about it. So the kind of title, provocative title, is about, it uses the word archaeology, which sounds about stuff that's really old and really sort of gone. And I want to share a quote with you here from some of you may know him, so Michael Shanks, from the archaeologist from Stanford. And as he describes it, for me, archaeologists do not discover the past, they work with what remains. And archaeology is about our relationship with what is left of the past, and more, archaeology is the discipline of things, the history of design, how people get on with the material world and with materiality itself. And I think, you know, you come to a conference like this, and you have so many really smart, speakers and resources and thinkers talking about the technology and really the culture that's driving the technological decisions and discoveries and progress that's being made. And it's, pretty amazing, because I happen to believe that most technologies are the result of a culture trying to engage with certain problems that are out there. It's not and there are things that are just technology sort of discovering itself, and I want to talk a little bit about that. But I think pretty deeply about cars and about automobiles, and I think that they actually mean something quite a bit more for a lot of us than just how we get from point A to point B. And I'm very excited about actually a future that includes autonomous vehicles and all sorts of transportation technologies that are different, and I'll talk about them a little bit. But I think it's also important for us to remember who we are and what it means to be truly human, and how we engage with materiality itself. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about, and then I'll just talk about a few of our activities, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has, or we can talk just about cars if you want to. That's what's more fun than that. I do that all the time. Trust me, being an insurance person, there is nothing more fun than walking into an insurance conference, being the only car guy there, because I'm the coolest person in the room. And my biggest advice to people is that whenever they say, like, gee, I wish I could be cooler, I'm like, no, you don't need to be cooler. Just lower your standards of the rooms you go into, because you can be way cooler. Being a car guy in those kind of settings is great. So for the last 5 years, I've lived kind of two professional lives. I want to share these two with you so that I can share a story about why I do so much of what I'm doing, and how we're really designing our organization to think about a future of how autonomous and other transportation technologies will come together with some of the cars that we care about most. And I want to talk about why. So, as Terry so kindly introduced, I run a business that started off in the insurance space. Now we're in the publishing and membership space. You heard a little bit, maybe if you were here at the previous panel, about our projects like Drive Share, our peer-to-peer rental business, and we have a lot of other really cool stuff that we're working on in addition to that. I won't bore you. But, a lot of my professional car world stuff when I'm not sitting in front of a computer, looks a lot like this. I go to cool places like Pebble Beach, and I judge with really smart people who know way more about cars than I ever can. I speak to lots and lots of groups at car events about the future and trends that are going on in the vintage car world and just in the automotive enthusiast world in general. And I have a lot of fun doing that. We have a lot of data. We're sort of the first organization to ever get a really bird's eye view of the data around the vintage car world. Again, what remains from what happens when cars eventually go off the road and what happens to them. We've really started getting some very interesting insights into all of that. There we go. But the second, and so you imagine, that's one part of my professional life. The second part of my professional life, I've been part of an organization called YPO for almost 20 years. It's a CEO organization of medium to larger size businesses. It was really my graduate school education in business was traveling around the world, meeting business leaders and doing all sorts of cool stuff. Strangely, somehow I ended up becoming the global chairman of YPO in 2016, 2017. It's the largest CEO organization, 27,000 members in 142 countries and $9 trillion worth of combined revenue. So when you're chairman of that thing, you get to meet some cool people, get to do some cool stuff. I traveled to 42 countries. I talked all over the world, but I wasn't talking about cars. I was talking a lot about the change that we're all feeling in society, the many changes that are affecting business people, affecting culture, driving all of those sorts of things. And it was like I had to think fast, I had to learn a lot, and I had to be able to speak about things that I never thought I'd be able to speak about. At our global conference in Vancouver here in 2017, we had this remarkable speaker. He would have fit in right here at this conference so well. His name is Ziv Avram, if anybody's ever met him before. He started a company in Tel Aviv called Mobileye. And he was speaking about the future of cities and what cities could be like if we had better transportation systems and if primarily all vehicles within the next generation of cities were autonomous vehicles that were not owned by individuals but that were shared. And it was absolutely a mind-blowing talk. There were about 3,000 people at the conference, and at one point at the end of his speech, we got 1,875 people up with virtual reality goggles on, and we set a Guinness Book of World Record, the most simultaneous people watching a virtual reality thing. And we took a ride through this city of what it could be like if every vehicle was autonomous without a driver and it was shared in its ownership. It was really, this guy's a Walt Disney character, and then I kind of gave him his Guinness Book of World Records. I did, honestly. I presented it to him. So I went back, and I had not actually met him. I met him backstage, and I said, that was remarkable. I really want to meet you. I want to get to know you. The stuff you're talking about is amazing. I think I need to know it. And I handed him my YPO business card, and he said, oh, that's very nice. You should come see me kind of thing. I'm like, no, you should come see me. He said, no, you should come see me. Well, he did sell the company for $15 billion 2 weeks later, so I don't feel bad about Ziv at all right at the moment. But then I handed him my Hagerty business card, the business card that I give out when I'm actually trying to make a living. And he got very serious, and he said, I'm so sorry, I'm going to put you out of business. He actually grabbed me by the arm, he got really serious, looked me straight in the eye, and he said, seriously, you have to find something else to do. Now, I don't know how your mother taught you to meet people, but my mother is much more polite than that, and I was kind of ticked, right? Here's this guy threatened to put me out of business. I complimented him, I gave him a Guinness Book of World Record, and he's going to tear my world apart. And it really bugged me, because what I realized is that, I have this really cool business. We have all this data. There are tens of millions of people that actually own cars that are cool, that are vintage cars, that are the new modern muscle car and sports car stuff. They're the greatest. We are in a new golden age of the automobile right now, of fun cars to drive. But yet I felt very much divided, like this picture I took last week out here in California. It's like I felt like I knew something and he knew something, and somehow our worlds were colliding. And our story in the car world wasn't good enough to stand up against his story. He was going to look me in the eye and say he was going to put me out of business and that I had to find something else to do. And, once I got over myself, I realized we got to get our story right. Our story, this is a story of humanity and how worlds collide. And we've been here before. And it's It's actually, okay, I'm going to have to got a little bit of a distance here thing goes. So what is our story? Why are we here at the Petersen Museum? Why are we talking about the future when we're at a museum, right? Because, museums kind of have a reputation, right? In some parts of the world, they're not gleaming and modern and cultural centers like we are here at the Petersen, where, some of the greatest cars in the world can be displayed and bring people in to get them excited about it because, you just don't get to see this stuff very much, right? That was at the Louvre 2011 when Ralph Lauren's cars were in there, finally elevating cars to their proper place in the cultural pantheon of, how we need to be thinking about it. But they don't look very active in that environment now, do they? So you go to Pebble Beach, they look a little bit more active. They at least had to drive on the lawn, right, on and off a golf course. Is that really what these things are meant to do? Or you could go over to Goodwood, and you see like remarkable grids of some of the greatest historic racing cars of all times, just being flogged back and forth with each other. They trade a lot of paint at Goodwood. It's absolutely terrifying if you're an insurance guy, like me. I mean, it's just, thank God Lord March knows how to, serve cocktails over there when some of these races are going on. But the reality is, okay, that's fun. I'm, trying to tell a little bit of a story and this is a story that we're telling ourselves. And of course, you go to Goodwood and it becomes kind of a costume party, right? We're kind of as much trying to react to or interact with these things in some way, sort of meeting the cars on their level. But is it any different than this guy at Greenfield Village doing like vintage photography in sort of this historic setting? Or let's just say, what else do we have? Quilting. Or quilting demonstrations or glass blowing demonstrations. It's interesting, kind of interesting, like maybe making your own soap is interesting. But, buying your own soap is a little bit easier way to deal with soap, in my humble view. This is, I don't know if we lift that up a little bit, it's just, yeah. Yeah, sorry, there we go. This is another one of my favorites. When you go see the reenactors, I remember I did a leadership thing at Gettysburg and watched all these reenactors giving tours over there, and I thought, who are those guys? And is this what car people are going to look like someday? That the only way we get to interact with cars when they're actually out there is this going to be us? We got to put on something and we got to pretend to shoot each other. It started making me a little nervous. Again, I don't think our story is quite straight. But it does make you wonder the bigger question. Do cars, I'm not talking about automobiles, I'm not talking about transportation, but do cars actually matter anymore? And who do they matter for, and how does it interact? What are these collisions going to be like? If you think back to the quote about archaeology, it's a kind of collision. It's a mixing of the past and the future through the choices that we make and what is going to be valuable to us. It's not about technology. It's not just about transportation. It's about something else altogether. So let's talk about the big changes. And I'm going to read these for anybody if you can't, so I apologize if I'm just going to read. These are the big changes that I talked about around the world when I was on my sort of world tour. Obviously, technology and automation, climate change, if you're not aware of the fact that there's some things going on with the climate, you're not paying attention. Global trade and digital markets. Markets are global now. Urbanization, which I would submit is the largest single trend, and that's why we're actually here having this conference here. It's about urbanization and population shifts. New ideological tensions that are different, right? We went from 3 stories at the beginning of the last century to 2 stories to 1 story, and now we're not sure if we have a story right at the moment ideologically that's going on. The rise of women and girls in leadership. Individual fulfillment eclipses faith. It's now more important that I feel fulfilled than I'm attaching myself to faith. And then finally, longevity. If you talk to most genetic scientists, we're somewhere between 8 and 11 years away from solving the 2 biggest reasons that most of us are going to die, which is cellular disease or inflammation, which could, if we all are healthy enough to survive that 8 to 11 years, could mean we get another 30 or 40 years on the planet. It's going to be a pretty different kind of world out there when people are not maybe getting to 100, but people are regularly getting to 130, 140 years old. Pretty different. Big changes, right? So it's, again, those collisions of the past and the present. Anybody seen this picture? It's a famous sort of thing. So this was New York City, 1900, right? There is actually an automobile in that photo if you look closely enough. Sorry, it's a little bit of a grainy picture. But everything else is horse-drawn or people are walking around, some bicycles. So this is 13 years later. It's all vehicles. There is actually a horse left in that photo. And if you go anywhere near, of course, Central Park, there's still horses there, right? They didn't go extinct. They're still there. They're just really expensive 30-minute rides around Central Park. But, I put this up there, you think about it, at some point there was a collision between some army that was filled with people carrying swords and people carrying guns. And it probably didn't work out very well for the people carrying swords. That's my guess. I don't know, I'm not a military historian. But you know what, the swords and the armor are still there. They're in a museum somewhere. And that's how we interact with them. Unfortunately, we'd like to see a lot of the cars that are in the museum out here on one of those racetracks or out driving around again, and we don't feel compelled to do the same thing, which is to grab that sword off of that display and make sure it still works anymore. We have a usage imperative in the automotive world, which is going to be an interesting challenge over the next 50 and 100 years. And our words are changing, right? This collision we have a phase change happening. We're talking about automobiles to automobility to now mobility. We just kind of accept that as a word, and we don't quite realize how much it's affecting the way we think about ourselves. Because when you look at most pictures, this was a lot like the picture of that Ziv Aviram was talking about, these beautiful, modern, gleaming cities that we dream about, where you have green spaces, you have a lot of tall buildings, you have pods. There are bicycles always. There's always smiling people, and absolutely always, different modes of transportation, and we can kind of accept it, which I found fascinating. Obviously, we like to see bicycles out there on the road. Bike sharing programs, an important part of our mobility strategy. I think the weirdest thing still to me at the moment is that we now consider scooters an actual normal part of transportation rather than a toy, and we'll get to that in a minute. But, this is the vision of the future, right? These gleaming things and happy people and all of this sort of stuff going on. And it's, being driven by companies who are trying to solve these problems for us. I'm still not getting very good signal there. So we talked about it. We heard earlier from the gentleman from Turo. Lyft, Uber, all of these things. I wanted to comment on the last panel about the math behind some of those businesses and when they're going to really start having to figure out how to charge for what they're currently giving away for us. But that's okay. We'll all be changed by the time the real pricing kicks in on that stuff. And, so here it is. You're out for a sunny walk in the world, right? And change is in front of you, and it just looks like a nice little gentle slope until you realize when, change happens, and this is kind of a little bit more like what technology looks like, and you think, okay, well, it's kind of high. Like that line kind of looks like if I had to somehow figure out how to jump up and touch the rim on a basketball court, I might still be able to do it. But the reality is that that's really how big the line is, right? That's what technology feels like today. It's just blowing our minds. And the problem is that it's an exponential. And, the problem with exponentials is you don't know what to do with them. The human mind thinks in story, and it thinks in a linear fashion. That's how we're wired. That's how we experience the world. We don't experience the world in an exponential way. And yet, that is what we're facing. That's why it feels so weird. And that's why all of those changes that I mentioned up there that are affecting the world, that's why some people view it as opportunity, but most people are just kind of freaking out. It's okay. There's a way that we can look at it, because technology in and of itself isn't perfect any more than the technology of the vehicles that we love to look at in the museum is deficient. Is it truly deficient technology, or is it something else that makes us attracted to it? And that's what I want to kind of move to in a minute. Oh, here's my one comment. By the way, the first conference that ever met, it was 1898, met in London to talk about 1898, not 1998, 1898, that was worried about the coming era of when, I think the prediction was that horse manure would stack up in the cities like 10 feet, and that's why they had to figure out how to start getting horses out of the middle of urban centers everywhere. And I just kind of find it ironic that you start seeing pictures like this. So what's getting piled up anywhere? I gave a speech a couple of weeks ago at South by Southwest in Austin, and all of the three major scooter companies delivered something like 20,000 extra scooters there to serve that really hip crowd down there. Apparently, they all forgot to tell anybody that you're not allowed to ride one of those scooters if you've been drinking. and which is a big thing that happens at South by Southwest. And actually, just talking to a police officer who was directing traffic down there, I'm like, are these scooters just driving you crazy? And he said, here's the thing you won't believe. The night before, last night, they had 500 DUIs on scooters. And because everybody thought, well, I'm not drinking and driving, I'm just riding the scooter. He said, like, people don't know. You got to be careful of those things. But just, is this the new manure that's kind of getting piled up? I'm just saying, just a question. Not commenting, I'm just, bringing you a story. So again, collisions of the past and the present. But we go through this, and we've been here before. Think about it. How many of you have a little bin in your house somewhere, someplace in your closet that you don't know what to do with the old cell phone, right? I counted it that I now have something like 5 Kindles that I don't use anymore. I'm a reader. I like to read a lot. But the better ones are just better, right? And I get to go buy the new one. And I have the new iPhone. And the recycling just doesn't work very well, right? Because that's actually just old computers. And just sitting there, what do we do with these things? So why automobility? And I would submit it's all this. It's all congestion. We've been talking about it here. This is what this conference is about. This is what the technologists are going to do to save us, is to help save us from this problem of congestion. Because this is what cities look like today, right? And anybody know what that is? That was the world's biggest traffic jam ever. So that was in Beijing, and that was, I think, 2010. And it was 62 miles long, and it lasted 12 days. Yeah, that would piss you off, wouldn't it? Imagine, 12 days, seriously. Like people, they just all left their cars there. That's what happens. And that's what we're asking technology to do, is save us from things like that. Because it's just brutal. And Beijing's a city of 22 million people. If you haven't been there, they have traffic problems. But they're solving it differently because, again, remember that ideological collision. They're able to make decisions a little bit differently there than other parts of the world are. I'm still struggling with this thing. Can technology save us? The answer is, of course, no. But technology can't do anything for us. And this is another list that I want to share with you, just if you think about it, as we think about what it is that matters to us as human beings. What premise are we hoping that technology, what premises and maybe fallacies are we thinking about technology that will save us? And is this actually who we want to be? So think about it. What are the main things that the technologies that are affecting so much of our world, that are freaking us out, bring to us? Well, they bring automation, right? They have another imperative of efficiency. Everything must be made more efficient. If it's faster and it's better and it's easier, it's better, right? We'll see. Novelty. It's got to be new. What's newer, right? I talked about my little Amazon Kindle addiction. I'd rather have the new one than the old one. That's what technology brings to us. Productivity, right? Human beings are meant to be more productive. That's what economics tells us. That's what technology is meant to do. Systems thinking. If I could just figure out the system in a little bit more of a complex way. Human systems, technological systems that'll just make life better, right? Virality. The only way things can spread in a technology-based world is it's got to spread virally. It's got to be able to move exponentially. Sharing, right? This is a little bit of what this conference is about. Are people going to want to own their own stuff? Or is just everything better if it's shared? And then finally is that data, especially big data, is truth. I think these are absolutely forces underpinning the technological revolutions that are freaking everybody out and changing the transportation world. And every one of them somehow in their own way is a fallacy. They're true. There's truth in them, like everything, but there's also problems with them. And if you accept them only at face value, if you accept only what their outputs are, I can tell you one thing, it may solve that traffic jam slightly in Beijing. It's not going to necessarily make us any happier. How many people think that when you walk around in a public place and you see every single person on their cell phone, do they all look really happy when they're sitting there? I was walking through the Amsterdam airport a couple of weeks ago in one of this huge lounge, and it was just struck. There was a sea of people like this, let's just say a couple hundred people. Every single person in that room all had their head down, and I just looked. I had to stop. It was remarkable. All looking at their phones except for one, a nun. There was a nun without a phone. Now, there was a priest sitting next to her on his phone, but the nun did not ever found. So this is what technology does, and it's okay. There's a technology imperative that you have to be aware, that you have to be careful of, and the imperative is that what is new is better. There's actually technically a fallacy around there, which is argumentum ad novitatem, which basically means the appeal to the novel. If it's newer, it's better. Whatever is newer, that the most current knowledge must be truer than whatever is in the past. Can you hear the irony in my voice? Right? It's better in a way, but is it really? Is it better with the way it makes us feel, or does it make us better human beings to have something that's simply novel? Has anybody heard of the Gartner hype curve? If you haven't, this is something you should just download a copy for yourself and stare at it now and then. It's very interesting because they said, what a technology trigger, as you see, the axes are visibility and time. Technology, it gets like early on in every technology that promises to change everything, you get a curve kind of like this. You get the trigger that causes the technology, right? Technology usually doesn't just invent itself, it's to do something, it solves a problem. And then there is this peak of inflated expectations. I love that. And then you have the trough of disillusionment or despair when you discover it doesn't actually do what you think it will do. And then there's this long, slow slope of enlightenment before you get to the plateau of productivity, which never quite meets the hype, but it manages to solve a lot of the problems that the original technological trigger was meant to do. The Gartner hype curve, with a lot of the things that we're looking at right now with the changes in technology, is kind of where we are. It's coming. We're going to be riding around in pods someday in a city near you, but we're in some ways, with certain pieces of it, we're falling into the trough of disillusionment at the moment because we have a long way to go. Because what technology doesn't do, it comes back to my first question, it's about what remains. What remains from the past that actually matters to us? I don't know about you, but if I think about, say, like the options of indoor plumbing versus having to use the restroom outside, I never wax nostalgic about having to use an outhouse. I don't think anybody does. There's nothing valuable in that. I don't think I learn anything from myself. But, right, horses didn't go away. Let's just talk about horses. People say, the car go the way of the horse. No. It's a $127 billion industry, the horse industry. There's 7.2 million horses living in the United States today. Most people don't ride them to work unless you're a cowboy. But yet, it's a vital thing. If anybody's ever been to the Kentucky Derby, it's a little bit more about the mint juleps and the hats. But there is a horse race that happens very quickly in the middle of that whole thing, if you haven't been there. Or you just think about it, just people being able to get outside and do things on horses, or Olympic jumping. Back I mentioned the sword example. You think of the fact that, you don't see people actually battling each other with swords, but we do have a sport that is called fencing today. So swords didn't go away. They're just kind of, you wear these funny outfits and it shows up on television every 4 years, right? So I've been starting to notice a resurgence in certain deficient technologies, and I don't know if you all have. I just bought my first turntable just this last year. Well, not my first. It was my first one in a long time. Right? Because I had this box full of old vinyl records that I wanted to be able to listen to. And I actually wanted to just experience what it was like to have to get up there and turn the thing over and move the needle around. Not because it's Spotify. I'm a Spotify fan. I get it. I've got the whole family program and all of that. But vinyl's cool. How many more people do you know that are just getting pleasure out of doing things like gardening? I know more people who are gardening today than I did 5 years ago. I know more people brewing home beer today than I did. Never had a good home brewed beer myself. Don't know quite why you'd want to do it. There's a lot of good options out there. But if you want to go do it, it's like I said, people maybe they're not making their own soap, but they are brewing their own beer. And it tells you something. It's people are feeling lost. That idea of having to sit in the back seat of a car, never touching a wheel again, freaks us out because we lose a little bit of agency. That's why people are brewing bad beer. That's why they're doing that stuff. It's much easier to go down to Whole Foods and get your organic vegetables than it is to grow them in your backyard, but that's not why we do it. That's not why we do it. That's not what human beings are. We are not just the agents or the passengers on technology's little bandwagon. There is more going on if we decide for it to be. So I'd ask, is it just about nostalgia? Is this just McKeel? No, I have been accused, and my wife accuses me of this all the time, that I have this like broken nostalgia gene, that I just care about stuff so much in the past. And it's true. So this is 1980, and this is the day I got my first car. I was 13 years old, just turned 13, and that is a 67 Porsche 911S in a snowbank, a couple miles from my house. And Stuart remembers this because your dad's car was just on the other side of that building, right there. Bo Hoag's car. Paid $500 for it, and I still have it today. I'm very proud of having it today. I restored it myself in the garage with my dad, because if you wanted, in my house, if you wanted to spend time with Dad, you were in the garage. There I am with hair. That's hair days gone by. I am nostalgic for hair. Wish I still had some. Be awesome. But, you know, my parents, I went to Pepperdine University out here a long way from Michigan, and I was dreamed of having that car out there. My parents wouldn't let me take it. They said, you don't want to have the old car out there. So for 4 years, I drove all those beautiful roads in a modern car in the 80s. I never got to bring the S out there. And so last week, I did this drive. I shipped the car out there, and I did this drive. So that's somewhere in Malibu. And then a few of us went up there. By the way, that's where the wildfires were. If anybody hasn't seen the effect of rain and how quickly things start to regenerate. And so that was a dream trip of mine. I mean, maybe I'm nostalgic, but I didn't need to get anywhere that day. It was just, you know, kind of living a dream that I started 30 years ago, that I wanted to take that drive, and so I did. And then we got the kind of great shot right up there at the end. Looks like a painting, doesn't it? So maybe I'm nostalgic, but I think that that's what really matters right there. And I didn't need to get anywhere that day, and it was glorious. It was absolutely glorious. So, you know, Henry Ford said that when he really invented the idea of the production, the cheap, mass-produced automobile, actually, if you look at the sentence that he claimed, I'll make a car for the masses that anybody could afford, he actually said it, the sentence finishes that it's about enjoying countless hours in God's wide open spaces with your family. That is actually was his vision for the mass-produced automobile. It wasn't about a car in every garage. It was about enjoying wide open spaces. And if there was anything I learned last week, and that is, and there's something magical in one case about the state of California. They built some incredible roads with nowhere to go. And it's just awesome. It's just awesome. So remember why we do some of this stuff, and it's not just about how to get there fast or in some technologically advanced way. So I want to just share with you, kind of close out this last section. I hope you're enjoying a little bit of this, is to think about what our story could be as it relates to the car and mobility. Because I know that we're going to need more technologically advanced transportation systems. We got to rethink how cities are working. It's going to take all of us as people move increasingly into cities. We don't need the masses of our populations outgrowing food for us anymore out in rural areas. That's all done by machines. You know, I live on a little peninsula where we grow cherries. And, you know, you talk to an old farmer, and he said when his grandparents had the farm, it took 60 people 2 weeks to harvest their crop. And then his parents, it took about 10 people, which is what I used to do as a kid. You go out there and pull tarps to pick cherries, and it took about a week. And now it takes 2 people 2 days. This is just a machine. It goes out there and does it. We don't need people living in rural areas anymore. And young people, by the way, if you want to know one thing about millennials that you know we're discovering through our data, is they go to cities to discover themselves. You go of your city moment, the city phase of your life, before you decide what you're going to do next. It's one of the reasons why it's putting so much pressure on cities, population-wide. So here's what the road ahead could look like, and I just want to I'm only going to give one stat. Terry said I have a lot of stats. Happy to share any stat about what's happening in the collector car world if you'd like. This is the first look at real data of how big the vintage car space could be. Because we finally built a machine, yes, an algorithm to figure out how to decode the registration data in the United States. Nobody could figure out how to do it before because it's all garbage in the systems that are out there that hold the data. So the numbers are pretty simple. If you want to know how many potentially collectible cars are out there, they're 44,136,451. I hope you have a couple of them. But we do. It's actually pre-1981, and what's interesting is about 14 million vehicles registered pre-1981, which is cars built before they had VINs, right? When they standardized, everything else built before that had a serial number. They started at 1 and they went to whatever number that they built. Modern collectibles is interesting. You start looking at cars which you get this huge spike happening in the 80s and 90s when you look at sort of sports cars, cars of limited production that are still on the road today. So this is data as of the end of 2017. So it's about a year old. More than we thought. We thought there were only a couple million vehicles out there like that, and there are a lot more. Of the 300 million registered vehicles in the United States. So when you think about how many are we going to need in the future? When you get population that's growing, these next generations are very, very large, people moving into cities. These aren't just going away. We're going to be dealing with these and hopefully enjoying those wide open spaces in some of them for a long time in the future. So we're going to be in a mixed environment. And how are we going to do that? What are we going to do? What's the right move for, Bruce Meyer out there with his beautiful display of cars when he wants to go out? Well, we need to celebrate the great ones, right? We need to make sure that we're properly celebrating. We have rituals. That was the day that we helped unveil the Bullitt Mustang after it had been discovered at the Detroit Auto Show. And that was a pretty exciting day because, it was kind of one of those long-lost things, celebrating a piece of history that a lot of people shared. You got to get out and do things. Sort of vintage off-roading and even modern off-roading is one of the most interesting driving places that's happening right now. It's hard to go drive modern cars fast on roads anymore. That's why so many kind of racing, high-performance driving facilities, all of those sorts of things are sort of having this renaissance, I guess. Not so much professional racing, but just people wanting to go out there and experience stuff, and off-roading is one of the other ways that we're seeing it. Cars and coffee, it's the new language of how the car world operates because it's not a big club. No one has to print the newsletter. You don't have to have club officers. You just show up in a parking lot for a couple of hours, and you never know what you're going to be parked next to, and then you just take off about 10 o'clock. It's amazing. So culture does answer questions differently sometimes than there's just a better way to do the technology around it. Another great cars and coffee. Lufgekult, if anybody's been at it's next week, right? Or is it later this week? Amazing what they've done to sort of bring actually a whole new type of crowd in to just admire really cool air-cooled Porsches. And I'm particularly biased towards them, so that's not my car right there. Pretty awesome. So what else do we need to do? It's always going to be about blending, right? The technology doesn't just win, it doesn't just replace everything. It's going to be about blending old and new. Well, for us, a big thing for us in our organization is about trying to figure out friendly ways to get the next generation involved. I think we've had something like 13 or 14,000 young people participate in our youth judging programs. And you want to know what the biggest challenge about putting these youth judging programs out there, especially at some of the big concours? The owners didn't want the kids touching their cars. And if you want to get me riled up, tell me that one. Kids can touch cars. It's okay. You can polish the fingerprints off of them. Because if sitting behind the wheel of that Ferrari means that she or he may want to own it someday, then that's what we got to do. Put them behind the seat. Let them get a little fleck of grass on the carpeting. It'll be just fine. The car will be fine. If you can race them the way they're doing it over in Goodwood, you can certainly let kids sit in them on a golf course someday. We started doing a couple of projects like this, which is how could we in the United States elevate cars to sort of a cultural level. It's not Ralph Lauren's cars in the Louvre, but it was our view through the organization we founded, the Historic Vehicle Association, the HVA. This was last year at the National Mall. Until 3 years ago, a car had never been on the National Mall in Washington. Very anti-car there. So we had to convince them with the first minivan, the 15th millionth Ford, the Bullitt. That's a World War I Cadillac, and then that is Ferris Bueller's, the fake Ferrari from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the movie. And that's the one, of course, that got all the attention. as you might imagine. But we have to do this stuff. We're going to have rituals and celebrations to make sure that the next generation are interested in them.
This is it?
This is it.
I don't get it. No touchscreen, no USB port, no Bluetooth, no anything.
Exactly.
Grandpa, how do you roll down the window?
It's called the window crank.
Sometimes the best way to connect
Cool.
is to disconnect. This moment of escape was brought to you by Hagerty, for people who love cars.
Being old is kind of cool.
It just breathes insurance, doesn't it? Like, that's what we're trying to do. Here's another one we did.
Isn't it time you connected to something greater? Sometimes the best way to connect is to disconnect. This moment of escape was brought to you by Hagerty, for people who love cars.
Another insurance ad. So sorry. Let's see what we have next. You know, so I think this is kind of what our world looks like, is that, you know, the reality is you're not going to be able to solve one argument. As our cities become more congested and the roads and commutes become longer. By the way, 10 years ago we were all talking about peak oil. We're not talking about that anymore. It's just like, but what's taking hold is congestion. And, but safety is going to be an issue where the vintage car people are going to have to start taking a higher road. You know, the nervousness that people are going to have when you start thinking about that issue. That's the secondary message when you sort of start cascading the message around the technologists that are advancing the autonomous vehicle world is going to be safety. So just being good citizens out on the road is going to be important. I think there's certain sort of car events that kind of advocate for driving like maniacs on public roadways probably need to settle down. I think that'd be probably a good thing. We're going to have to kind of be good citizens about it. Because, you know, this world may come, but we want to still allow it to happen. So we created this little, a little video just to try to see if we could get, you know, how we could engage with people that weren't necessarily car people as well as people that were car people, and I want to just show it to you right now. So the answer, should we fear the future? No, but we do need to think about it. So I started off by asking a couple of questions that, you know, hopefully were provocative to you, and that is, you know, what from our past are we going to allow to remain? I mean, there is no doubt about it that we live in this time of incredible progress. Even for all of those changes that are happening out there that are scaring people to death sometimes and freaking them out. I mean, to even think for a second that the majority of the people on the planet are not living better, healthier, longer, safer, less violent lives than they were in the time that our grandparents lived, you're just not looking at the data. It's an amazing time. But what it is to be truly human, and what's going to make us not just feel fulfilled, but it's going to kind of connect us first with ourselves so that we can connect with each other without being maniacs and without, just throwing really bad tweets at each other back and forth. So we got to decide what it means to be human, and what are we going to do with these things that have meant so much to so many of us for so long. And I think the car can have a big part of it is if we decide to find ourselves in what remains, because there's some truly extraordinary vehicles out there that need some love and some attention, and they're waiting for you to put your cell phone in the glove box and to go out there and just be present with yourself, and maybe to do a little bit what Henry Ford suggested, is to go enjoy wide open spaces, countless hours with your family, because they're pretty special, and they're not just going to go away anytime soon. So my goal is that somewhere, I took that picture last week, is that that's where we find ourselves, out there somewhere on the road. It's not going to be for everybody, but that's what cars have done for so many of us. And it's not about just mobility. It's about finding ourselves out on the road. So thank you very much. I've been given a couple minutes for questions, like 2, so I think I can take a few questions if anybody has any or comments. If you think I'm crazy, it's okay. I take feedback very well. Yes?
So last week, Tesla announced that they're going to start, thank you. So last week, Tesla announced that they're going to start selling insurance to their own vehicles. I'm in the insurance industry myself. I don't know if you guys take a look, but one of the interesting questions that we had last year at this event was, who's going to be responsible for accidents involving these kinds of these vehicles? And the question was whether it was going to be a product liability situation, or whether insurance companies would continue to exist or would cease what they're doing. And last week I saw that Tesla, they're basically put an endorsement out there that put the liability, who's going to pay, is on the insurance company.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that, and whether that'll stick, or if that's the first shot, or if
There's a lot in there. I think even just connected cars of some way probably start skewing the liability when it comes to insurance. We're going to be in this mixed environment for decades, long probably past all of us are in this room or around. Maybe some of the younger folks, if you benefit from all the medical technology, you'll see a period where there really won't be, the last of the really cool cars will be next to the suits of armor. But we're just going to have insurance for a long time. And, a couple of other things. My observation, it's just like when people talk about small car companies really thinking that they're going to crush the big manufacturers, is that if there's one thing I've learned about business is that, it's really dangerous if you're a mouse dancing with elephants, especially when the elephants are scared. And you got a lot of scared elephants out there right now, and that includes the insurance industry. So it's not going to be just a binary sort of thing. I think Tesla has some of their own challenges from an insurance standpoint, and they're a long way off. I mean, based upon all the accident data, because, by the way, the company they announced that with is a partner of ours, they're a long way off from that being able to really work very well. So it's going to be complex. The one thing I would say is that in the future, insurance is going to be kind of like it is now, and kind of more like a warranty. There's going to be some that just kind of comes with it, and some you're going to have to buy, because that's the likely design in the future. Happy to talk afterwards, though. Yeah. Anyone else? No? Questions? Yes.
So clearly there's a lot of passion, a lot of emotion that's gone into the creation of these beautiful pieces that you cherish so much, and that is a rearward-looking view. How do we ensure that that same level of passion and human design, as experienced designers, is carried into the future? Because I think the success of these pods of the future will rely upon the human design aesthetic and components that make them desirable and aspirational for lifestyles in the future.
Yeah, great. It's a great question. One thing in our data, what's interesting even just about the challenges with next generation, there's this whole weird kind of meme out there that young people just don't like cars. And the reality is young people can't afford cars. The young people, the data is coming from the generation that came up right after the financial crisis. The financial crisis only started 10 years ago. We're still in it. And so the biggest challenge that, as we looked at it, wasn't just the design sense or the social sense, is that will the next generation to be able to afford what previous generations were able to? The oldest millennials right now are now 38. They're not the 18-year-old communists that a bunch of old people say they are. They're not. They're real people with real desires. They just grew up in a time when they couldn't make money in the same way that previous generations could, but they're starting to. And so if there's another truism that we've kind of seen in the data, is the more money people make, the more they act alike, and the more they act like their parents. And the millennials are the children of baby boomers, which was the biggest car collecting generation out there. So I think I think the next generation isn't going to be an issue from that standpoint in terms of interest. I think it's going to be the generation after that, sort of a 30-year view, not a 10-year, not a 20-year view, 30 to 50-year view, which is what are they going to remember, and were those good memories? And then again, that overwhelming thing, can they make money, sufficient money to be able to afford that kind of stuff? So I don't think this is a big problem right now. I mean, if we were to project 100 years ago, if we're worried about 100, I don't know. I'm not at the moment, but happy to talk about it later. I think I'm about out of time. So happy I'm around and happy to take any more conversations afterwards. Again, clearly I'm passionate about this subject, but I'm passionate not just about it for the cars. I'm passionate about it for us, because I think we shouldn't just take the language that we're hearing about progress and technology at face value. There are challenges with it. There are fallacies with it. Some of it is just not true, and it's not going to all happen the way people say. And, our goal is we're going to get 6 million people organized in a way that they can think forward about being human in cars. And the math I can explain later, but that's what we think it's going to take to save driving for the next generations. So thanks again, and happy to be with you all.